Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm a site reliability engineering manager from G Research down in London. I'm also very enthusiastic. I'm hoping not to fall off the stage. If you're looking for me on Twitter or all the socials, you can find me on Is It Vegan? I will mostly be talking about vegan stuff there, but if that's your thing, hit me up. Let's do that. You can also find me on LinkedIn. That's my picture on LinkedIn, and it's awesome. Recruiters love it. Get yourself a vegan sandwich. You'll get all the emails. Oh, I also think I'm funny, and my son told me to tell you a bunch of jokes, but I'm not going to do that. So today, maybe. Well, today I'm going to tell you a story. It's not the typical bullet point type of thing. This is a story about something that happened to me in my life and reality. So a few things you should know about me. Yes, I am enthusiastic, and I'll try not to fall off the stage. But I'm also an American who's been living in London for a while. So my grammar is it's all over the map at this point. So please excuse my misuse, and abuse of S's, U's, Z's, and Z's. Also, in this talk, I'm not going to mention any whiz-bang technology. So if you came here for that, you're not going to get it. You're going to get a story. Hopefully you all got popcorn at the beginning. So let's do this thing. 2015 was terrible. 2015 was the worst year of my professional career. It was awful, just awful. It felt like that. It didn't look like that, thankfully, but it felt like that. So to understand, we got to wind back the clock a little, and I have to give you some context about where I came from and what was going on. So in the year 2013, I joined this very fictitious company called Loud Clock. Okay, for this whole presentation, I've made up a story, and I've made up an application. It looks nothing like anything you'll see on my CV, but there's this company called Loud Clock, and it's this young, fresh startup, and it's doing awesome stuff, and it's leading the market with this application that we're making. And this application does something very simple. It just measures the loudness of your clocks. So we'd have customers, and we'd measure the loudness of their clocks, no problem. They came with us at wristwatches, and we'd say, yeah, that's loud. And then they kept coming with more and more things, right? So we're building out this application, and they're coming with more and more things. They're like, hey, but, we've got grandfather clocks, and we've got cuckoo clocks, and we've got alarm clocks. So we're building out our application in order to deal with all of these things. And, we're, still moving along. And then they're coming and they're saying, hey, but wait, we've got these apps that do clocks, and we've got factories that build clocks, and we have people that work at the factories that use the apps. And so we kept adding stuff on, and our application was getting more and more complex. And it got so bad at one point that we were like, we got to re-architect this thing. We're going to try something new. Let's do this thing. So around the end of 2014, we actually re-architected the whole thing. Like for a majority of 2014, there was a team re-architecting something while someone else was still, paying the bills and keeping the lights on. So that was 2014. So we rolled out this thing at the end of 2014, this whole re-architected, system, this new thing. But things were getting tricky, right? And we had re-architected the system, but we hadn't re-architected the organization, right? We still had that classic, dev on one side, releasing features, building out all this business logic, ops on the other side, and it was the throwing it over the wall, catching it on the other side. Ops didn't know what they were deploying. Dev didn't know how it was deployed. Nobody knew what was going on in production. It wasn't good. At this point, I'd started out as that senior dev doing all the front end, back end, ordering burritos, like all that stuff that you do when you're a startup. But now I'm a dev manager, and I'm leading a team, probably 5 or 6 people, and we're pushing features hot and fast, because that's what you do when you're a startup. You push features hot and fast. My team would come to me, and they'd complain. And they'd say things like, Brian, this release was terrible. My feature went out, but it's not working. I don't know if my feature was released. We have these outages. There's all these problems. And the dev team that I was leading, they had no visibility. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't see these things that were actually working in production. And so releases were bad, right? They were terrible, but outages were worse, right? Outages were just terrible. And it was too often that I would get a phone call from someone in ops, or a Slack message usually, but some people still used phones. And I would get a call, and they'd say, hey, there's a problem, go fix it. You know, and they would either have stumbled over it, or they would have gotten a support ticket from a customer. We did have alerts, right? We had alerts, but we weren't alerting on the right stuff, and we weren't alerting the right people. Like there was a time I got a call in the middle of the night. Ops person called me up and said, hey, I need you to go fix this feature. It turns out this feature had been written and tested and maintained by our Ukrainian team. And it was the middle of the night, but in Ukraine it wasn't. They were all up, and they were all working, and they were actually already starting to fix the problem. But for some reason, I got woken up, and I didn't like that. So in the last quarters of 2015, right, we started to think something different needs to happen here. So I'm having conversations with the VP of engineering. We're both, similar mindset, and we had just read the Google SRE book, and it's like, ooh, this makes sense to me, And so we're having those conversations, and we're saying, this is something that we need to try. We need to test this out. We need to do this. And so this was a good time for me, right? Like I'd been doing this dev manager thing for a while, and I wanted to do some more technical stuff, and I especially wanted to do more stuff on the ops side. So we created this SRE function at Loud Clock, and I became the first SRE. I took it on, and I said, let's make this thing happen. But it wasn't a blank check. It wasn't just like fist in the air, let's do this thing. The VP of engineering and myself, we had some goals, right? We had some things in mind. We wanted to measure this thing. We wanted to make it real. We wanted to improve visibility into the application. We wanted to reduce outages and like the time spent in outage. And we wanted to improve engineering practices. Now these goals were really stretched, right? Like I'm one person. Like how am I going to do all this stuff? Like how the hell am I going to measure improving engineering culture? I don't know. Like it was much easier for me to figure out, okay, I know how to reduce, I know how to measure, reduction of incidents and outages. That was easy, except, once we actually started measuring them. But as it was a new function, we winged it for a while. So the first thing I did as a brand new SRE is everything wrong, right? I just did everything straight up wrong. I started diving into problems, and I started fixing them myself. I would stumble through the code, and I'd find something that was wrong, and I would fix it. And I would push it out the door. And I spent a lot of time doing that. 2-minute fixes that would take 200 minutes, that kind of stuff. And I had to step back. Like I really had to step back, and I said, no. This isn't the plan. This isn't how I want to do it. I want to be proactive, not reactive. I need to stop firefighting. I need to focus on cataloging these problems. And I started making this pretty serious catalog. But in order to see all the problems, because there was quite a few, I was only seeing the dev side, right? I put myself on the support rota. Now before, this rota was just full of ops people. I was the first dev sort of to get into this thing. And on the very first page, everything went wrong, right? It was just like totally bad. I got paged, there was no run book. There was no playbook. I had no idea what to do. So I talked to my fellow ops people, and they said, oh, just restart that service, just restart that container, just do that, Same old story. The problem was the ops team didn't know how to debug the issue, right? Because they didn't know what the application did. And the devs didn't know how to debug production because they didn't know what production looked like. So dev continued to push out features. And I continued to get paged when things went pear-shaped. I also started getting paged when things weren't going wrong. So we had that problem too. We had some obvious alerting issues. So because ops, they were the only ones getting alerted. And they were the only ones handling outages. And sometimes they were the only ones that even knew outages were existing, like that we were in that problem. But because I was in the rota now, I could start participating. And I'm not shy. So if someone calls me and says, here's a problem, I'm going to go find the person to fix that problem. And I found out I was the only one doing that, right? And I was like, why isn't the rest of ops doing this? What are they doing? And I was like, either they're too proud to ask for help, or they just don't know who to ask. It turned out, thankfully, that it was the latter. They didn't know who to ask. And we could fix that with documentation and education, right? Education is like a super important part of engineering, right? Many aspects of engineering. For example, I had flown to Tel Aviv to work with our team there, and my jet lag wasn't great, and I was on call. Someone covered while I was flying, so it was okay. And I got paged late that night, and I woke up, and I'm like, ugh, what's going on? And someone in ops had rolled out a feature, and it involved a schema migration, and it was locking the tables, and there was all this nonsense going on, and we spent all night. And customers were shut out of the site, like big problems. Problem was the metrics that we had, they didn't show us this, right? It didn't show us the user experience. It didn't even show us where to look, right? We needed SLIs, right? That was the next part of the plan. We needed SLIs, but we weren't in that mindset yet. We were still in this madness phase, right? We had millions of metrics and alerts coming out the other side based on these metrics, but they weren't SLIs. They weren't measuring our services. I could tell you how many yellow grandfather clocks each customer had, but I couldn't tell you how many more messages can go through the queue before knocking it over, or even to predict when that could happen. I knew that we needed to do SLIs, and I thought I knew where to start. But I was only seeing half the problems, maybe not even that much, really. I understood the severity of our code, and I was getting an understanding of our infrastructure. But these were my expectations on the application, right? I thought I knew what the customer wanted, but I didn't know. And it wasn't until we had a series of conversations with our customers and our product owners that I really understood. And so then I could take that information, and the concepts that I had learned from the SRE book, and I could apply it, and I could make those actually useful SLIs. So we had SLIs in place, right? And we're running with them, and things are happening. But then it was time to start really thinking about SLos, right? That's what's coming next, What are we aiming for? Like, what do our customers expect? So our customers, our conversations with the customers taught us which services and features were important to them. And so we could base our SLOs around those requirements. And there were surprises too. We found that many customers, they were mainly concerned at the rate at which we could scan their clocks, right? The front end wasn't that big of a deal to them, but we always had to keep that throughput high. So knowing that, it was very easy to say, any fixes that we can do that can make this line go up, go do that, prioritize that. That's the right way for us. So I took these SLIs and these SLOs, and I started generating dashboards. And I spent quite a bit of time making very beautiful and lovely dashboards and tweaking them. And based on what I was seeing, right, I started writing up tickets and assigning them out. We knew what our customers wanted, and we knew what could fix some of these worst offenders. So based on the severity and the likelihood of reoccurring, we could start fixing those real bad ones. It still felt like we were winging it, but it seemed to be coming together. So SLOs are catching on, right? I'm getting dev and I'm getting ops and I'm getting everyone on this right path. And it's reliability and we're doing it, we're making it happen. But there were other members of the organization that didn't know that we were on this path. They didn't even know what this path was. So I'm pushing for reliability, and sales and marketing are saying, hey, we need to blog about some features. Where are our features? Give us our features. But to me, that was the wrong mantra. Especially as our availability and reliability continued to be called into question by our paying and potential customers. We continue to have downtime. We continue to have outages. We never lost track of their clocks, but customers couldn't log in to see that. Availability is the #1 feature, and we as an organization have lost sight of that. It was my job to remind them. So I took my SLOs and I took my graphs to the VP of engineering, and we had that conversation. I said, here's where we were, here's where we are now, and here's where we want to be. And I made it very obvious. It was a check-in, and we did this thing, and it was good. And then he could take that information and he could bring it to the VP of sales and marketing and say, hey, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. And he had that value-based conversation. And it helped, right? It wasn't immediate and it wasn't magic, but it helped. And the team continued to push reliability fixes. So we had this buy-in on reliability throughout the dev organization. But to really improve, we had to bring accountability to dev, right? We needed better playbooks, and we had to help ops with a pager. And they were still just, it was only them. But thankfully, a lot of the work that we were doing was going to make it easier for devs to own their apps in production. But it was still just me doing the observability work. It was obvious I had to share this knowledge with the team, right? I was the only person with the SRE title, but that didn't mean I was the only person who cared about observability and reliability. I encouraged engineers to build out their SLOs, consulting with their customers, of course, and taught them how to set up rules for alerting. And we spent a lot of time deleting rubbish alerts, and I brought them with me, and I said, this is why this is crap. This one's garbage. This is why. Come on, let's do this thing. And we talked about, avoiding alert fatigue and doing all that. And getting playbooks on those alerts, right? Getting down, writing that unshared knowledge and attaching to those alerts was hugely beneficial. So it wasn't easy, right? Some developers, they always want to work on the new and shiny. And so it was difficult to get them on board with me. So I took them to some phone calls, with customers, and I said, this is what they're saying, listen in. And they did, they listened. And they began to understand, and they began to start owning some of this stuff. And they went for it. We really got into it. But to work with the business, I think it was time for me to start pushing air budgets. So I know this is all very rosy, but it's like I'm coming with air budgets at you. And I could bring that to the marketing, and I could bring that to the business side of the house to say, look, we've done our SLOs, and we're building out our air budgets, and look, we're great right here, right now, so we're going to keep pushing features. And we started pushing features, and the sales team loved it. And then there were other times where it's like, oh, man, we're not doing so hot right now, so we're going to back off, and we're going to do reliability for a while. And they begrudgingly understood, and they were OK with it. So with these few key indicators in place, and some understanding of what our customers desired from our apps, with SLOs defined and error budgets in play, we were turning it around, right? We took our SRE culture and we applied it to our org, and we were succeeding. Our mean time between failure was increasing, our support tickets were going down, and the pagers were going off less. And this felt great to me. So I painted a very rosy picture there, right? I'm a very positive, enthusiastic, arms-waving kind of guy. But there's a lot of things that didn't go well, and I could spend a long time talking to you about that. But, like any postmortem, what went well, what went lucky, what didn't go so well, let's talk about just a few of them. So the org is bigger than engineering, right? I didn't tell you about all the time that I had to spend with the business side of the house actually explaining SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs to them. I didn't tell you about all the time that they just felt in the dark, where they just saw feature releases just dry up, and they were like, what happened? I don't know. I missed those conversations, right? I didn't bring them together as closely as I wanted to. So pro tip, engage early and engage often. And so you might also recall that I spent a lot of time with dashboards, and they were great, and they were beautiful, and people would walk by and they'd say, oh, look, there's a problem here. We should go fix this. This line is not good. And it's like, oh, yeah, I should have spent more time on alerts rather than these silly pretty graphs. So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was, seemed very pleasant, but there was a lot of rocky roads along the way. But in the end, it worked, right? We really made it work. We brought that DevOps culture. We started meeting some of those goals that we had set at the beginning, and it was great. And then in late 2016, LoudClock was purchased by another company called Frisco. It was awesome. Everyone lived happily ever after. So if you wish to live happily ever after, I'm strongly going to suggest you do a few of these things. Measure the things that matter. Use those measurements wisely and share them. Have open conversations throughout the org, not just within engineering. Your org is bigger than just engineering. Educate the team on things that strictly aren't code. Work on concepts around observability, communication, and empathy. Thank you, everyone. I now work for this company called G Research. We talk about SLOs, we talk about SLAs, we talk about our customers. If you're looking for a job, come talk to me. We love you. That is all.
Thank you. We now have a few minutes for questions, so either raise your hand or please come to the microphone.
So you said you did this all as a one-person SRE.
Yeah.
What would you do if you had one more person? What would you have that person do?
I probably would have done a lot of the same thing I was doing as one person, but doing it as two people. You know, you saw the word cloud in Matthew's talk, right? There's 1,000 things that you can do. There were some things that we wanted to do really well, and I think I probably did them really shoddily in the beginning. So if there was two people, then it's somebody you can bounce ideas off of, somebody that you can work with very closely that has that same goal and that same mindset and that same drive.
I think you were very brave to try and go from the Google book to trying to implement it, because I was a Google SRE at the time the book came out, and I was looking through it going, oh, yeah, in theory that's nice, and also that's the third time you've explained that thing differently. For other people going through the same process of going from the concepts and the book, and the workbook's an improvement, but it's still not great, what are the gaps that you found that you had to make up from your own experience in getting to successful SRE in your company?
Yeah, so the book is good, right? The book is a good start, and it tells you a lot of the things that you need to know. But it's very good on paper. It's when reality becomes a thing that it's the problem. And what I found, remember how I said there was no whiz-bang technology talked about in my presentation? It's because it wasn't technology. That wasn't our problem. Our problem was around culture and communication and some of these things, and making sure that we were all on the same page. Like, the business side kept saying, I don't have anything to blog about, give me something to blog about. It's like, cool, I really want you to be able to blog about something, but I really want our customers to be able to log into our application any time of the day, not just between the hours of 8 and 2. So we had to focus on some of those things. So understanding what SLIs, SLos, and SLAs were was a gap, and there was, I had something about this at one point, but it's described differently in some places, especially chapter to chapter at sometimes. And so understanding that and like really letting it sink in was a big one.
So I found your story pretty interesting in the sense that you came from the engineering side over to the ops side and worked with the ops directly in order to bring more of an SRE mindset to the ops teams. I find that in most organizations, they actually go about it the opposite direction, where it's ops that's generally going to engineering, saying, hey, engineering, you work with us as us being your SRE. What advice would you give to operations teams having come at it from the opposite side as ops teams try to think about things from more of an SRE focus?
Yeah, I think actually both of the talks earlier talked about this, but it's really around education around some of the soft topics, right? Like the ops team is used to getting those tickets and solving the problem. But there's a lot of work around, learning the concepts and having that empathy and knowing who your customer is and knowing what they want that you really have to think about. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but I didn't come from that angle, so I don't want to give you any bad information.
I think we have time for one more. Anyone?
So you talked a lot about the transformation of your team and working with the ops side. What changes happened in that operations team? What was kind of the transition that they made?
That's not the rosiest of pictures. What ended up happening with the majority of the ops team is that some of them ended up, building out Ansible frameworks and building out Terraform and doing all of this stuff and really taking that on. And then others of them were like, I don't want to do this. And so they ended up leaving. right? And you know, God bless them, I love them. They're very good people, but it just wasn't for them. It didn't make sense. It wasn't the culture that they wanted. It wasn't the job that they were looking for. So they just ended up moving on. But the ones that stayed, right, they came and they folded into my team. And because at one point I ended up hiring a bunch more SREs and being the manager and bringing on whatever. And they came on board and they started getting into this education process and doing the learning and really talking to people, you know, not just headphones on in the dark corner, but actually going, you know, pod to pod, desk to desk and having those conversations. So it was sort of like lighting that spark for them.